Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Tools and Equipment for the Management of Invasive Species in Natural Areas. My name is Sylvan Kaufman. I'm a volunteer with the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council. And I just want to give you a little bit of background about this series of webinars. It's one of many that we're offering this year in a series called A Focus on Sustainability. We started doing this program in 2013, and it's organized by a group of organizations known regionally in the U.S. for their quality education programs for professionals in the landscaping industries and landscape design. We are working together to expand the reach of our education programs through this webinar series. In case you're not familiar with all the organizations, they're all nonprofit, largely volunteer groups, and they are the Ecological Landscape Alliance in the northeastern U.S., the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council in the Metro D.C. area, the Midwest Ecological Landscape Alliance, MELA, and EcoLandscape California. So I'm pleased today to introduce Steve Manning. He has spent the last 24 years working on invasive species issues. He's founder and president of Invasive Plant Control, Inc., and that's how I first heard about him, as I'm also been involved with invasive plant issues for a long time. His company has controlled hundreds of invasive species for a wide variety of land managers, including federal, state, municipal, and private landowners throughout the world. Mr. Manning also designs and implements multiple training courses and workshops, and he is heavily involved with local, state, and international industry development projects, including volunteer-based early detection networks. He is one of the authors of the 2010 Field Guide for the Management of Invasive Plants in Southern Forests, and I'll post a link to that because it's really a great reference book. He's also acting president of the Pacific Northwest Invasive Plant Council, current vice president of the Mid-Atlantic Invasive Plant Council, co-chair of the National Military Fish and Wildlife Association's Invasive Species Working Group, and he serves on the board of the North Carolina Invasive Plant Council. All this even though he's based in Nashville. So you can tell that Steve really gets around and has a great knowledge of invasive species from across the United States. So I'm very pleased that he's taken the time today to present this webinar for us, and I'm going to turn the controls over to him.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for coming or sitting in today. All the things that I like to do, the one thing I like to do the most, and I think a lot of people like to hear about the most, is tools and equipment, because at the end of the day, that's what we all do. And there's nothing more exciting, I think, in our job than getting out of the office, putting down the management plan, and actually implementing it in the field. So over the years, I've been fortunate enough to go to a lot of places and work in a lot of field situations and work with a lot of employees that have really given a lot of really good feedbacks, and as well as going to trainings and doing the training and hearing feedback from everybody in these places. So what you're going to see today is a very, what's normally about a half-a-day workshop. And you can see on this slide it says that 397 slides. Well, I was just telling Sylvan that I cut it down from 500 slides earlier, so be prepared for PowerPoint poisoning. But hopefully you won't pass out. Hopefully you'll enjoy what you're seeing. It's just hard when you're talking about tools and equipment and talking about management concepts for invasive species. It's hard to leave things out. So at the end of the day, if I don't get through all these slides, I might have to skip through some. I've got my timer set. In fact, I'm starting it right now. So I basically have 50 minutes or less, and then I'll leave some time for questions. If I don't get through all the tools and equipment, I do have other presentations posted online on my website, and I can also pass them along to this group as well that they can post. And that way you can kind of sit at your own leisure and watch, hear about different tools we might not get to today. One thing I won't have time to do today that I think is really important, it's kind of a new level of tools which is beyond the field. It's taking what we do in the field and tracking it over time so that two of the most important things can happen. First of all, we can have prevention techniques, because if we have good prevention tools, I think we all know we're going to have a much better program. And then good maintenance and tracking tools for after the fact. I can't tell you how many times the tools I'm going to show you have been used really well. A site's been cleaned out in the first year, but over the course of time it just grows back again because there's not adequate tracking and adequate follow-up. So one thing I'd love to share with you guys sometime is about IPC Connect, some online tools we've been building with the University of Georgia and EdMaps, and there's a lot of really neat ones that we have out there now that give real-time data to the work that's being done. Everything from, logging on and seeing how much herbicide was sprayed, before and after pictures on the day of the treatment, to what we're working on now, hopefully being able to use in the future, and that's having spray wands that actually have GPS on it, so every time you pull the trigger, you know where the treatment has been applied. So I won't get into that today, but I will get into prevention just a little bit, because ultimately, if you don't have prevention techniques, it's going to be a long road ahead. So when we're talking about prevention, we can talk about really simple things like not letting Japanese stiltgrass grow on your mower deck and then driving around cutting the grass with seeds floating everywhere, to cleaning your personal field gear, cleaning office parking lots. I walked out of a forest in Florida, and Tony Pernis walked up to my back and said, "Let me take a picture of you." And this is what I didn't even notice was on my back that I was walking around with, getting ready to get in a car and go to another site. We have to be really careful in our prevention techniques, as simple as cleaning our personal gear. There's other bigger, better tools available out there for prevention. You guys probably have seen a lot of the spray systems that are out there for cleaning vehicles when you come on and off a site. This is one of the military level systems. You can see when the military comes back from overseas, what a lot of their equipment might look like. So they're bringing a lot of seed and things back from other countries in the dirt that's caked under these trucks. You can just imagine what might be in there. So, we have different levels of what we could be using. This is simple, but it doesn't really get the job done. You can see, hopefully you're seeing the video there. It takes a long time. You're probably not getting all the dirt off of there. On the other hand, that works a little bit better. Now, let that run through really quickly. Obviously, we're not all going to be able to afford a nice piece of equipment like that, and if you shot that at your chainsaw, you probably would cause some issues here, boots. But it's kind of a cool example of what the military is using at the higher level in terms of getting some of the bigger equipment washed. In our case, it might be boats coming off of ramps that are coming out of the lake in our neighborhood. It might be trucks that are going in to fight forest fires in the west. There needs to be something there that's actually cleaning the trucks going in and cleaning the trucks going out. So you have to check the standards of the equipment you have. You can do things like get boards, 2x4s, and mats and just spray up into them, but you're really just going to dump all those seeds right next to the road. I would suggest this one system, which is another tool. And I'll also say this. Most of these tools that I recommend, nobody pays me anything to say anything about them. It's just tools that I've used or I've seen used that work really well. And I'm going to tell you about the tools I don't like, too, and I'm going to be very blunt about it. And it all has to do with how well they work for us or not work for us in the field. Sheila Kennedy, who owns and operates SK Environmental, has a great wash system that's more for the field personnel of levels like that we usually work with. It looks grand, but that's an all-encompassing, self-contained wash system there. It has baffled water and holding tanks. It has everything right there that you need. You can see it's got the same kind of setup in terms of rolling on there. You can roll that tarp up, put it back on when you're done. It's got the jet sprays that come out underneath it. Very targeted, very, very well-researched product that they have. They've even included a prevention rinse now that has an herbicidal rinse in it to control remaining invasive species. So it's pretty cool how nowadays you can not just spray it off with water, but you can kill the seeds that might be remaining on there. So just a good example of some prevention. Two prevention tools I think are really important. You can have a brush to scrape your boots, or you can have a spray wash to get through that, or you can go to the local car wash before you go to a site. But somehow let's make sure we're not taking seeds back and forth, whether it's through that or carrying firewood to the wrong place or whatever it might be. I don't have time to go through this today, but I'm going to just tell you really quickly because I think it's important. As we look at tools, I want you to think about these 7 factors that can affect your choice of methods, okay? I'm going to show you a lot of methodologies, but you really need to understand what's the long-term plan for the site. Are you going to put a parking lot there, or are you going to use that as a natural area forever? What's the need for selectivity? Is this going to be an area that just needs to be cleaned like this every year, so selectivity is not really required? Or is it an area like this at Fort Detrick in Maryland, where you've got jet bee growing on the bottom and you've got spice bush or another desirable species growing over the top? If that's the case, figure out the tool you're going to use based on the selectivity you're going to use for this site. In this case, we just waited. We use seasonality. In this case, let the native plants go dormant while the jet bead held its leaves longer, and then we were able to spray the jet bead without harming the native plants. Understand selectivity. You know, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen sumac sprayed when they were supposed to be treating ailanthus. Make sure the applicator, which is the tool that's the ultimate tool that you have, make sure that applicator is the best applicator you can get. Make sure that they know their plants, make sure they know what they're treating and what they're treating with. Selectivity is really important when picking a method. It says Arlington County up there, but it's actually Amicalola Falls in Georgia. It's a Georgia State Park. This is standing on a boardwalk looking up at the waterfalls with 50 people behind me. It's probably not best in this situation, although there's a way to do it that's environmentally friendly, you know, with, say, rodeo or some chemical, go spray this, you know, but it really wouldn't be a good thing for the public view of this site. It wouldn't be good in a lot of ways. So maybe it's doing selectivity, and the choice of your methodology is based on, let's get up there, let's hand pull this, let's go down and let's do some education on the topic. What's the level of infestation? Make sure you know before you pick your tool whether you're working with a Chinese privet infestation that looks like this or one that might be a level 2, 3, 4, 5. A level 5 is this type of Chinese privet where you just can't walk through it. It's so dense. A level 1 would be maybe a few stems scattered throughout the forest. It's going to make a lot of difference with the tools you choose based on the level of infestation that's there. And here's just a really good example down in the Everglades. On the left side of the road, you can see it's been previously treated, probably the year before. There's stems in there. There's stuff that needs to be retreated. It needs to be maintained. But you're going to be going in there with a backpack sprayer probably. Whereas on the right side of the road, this is what the left side used to look like. You're going to be doing a lot more hack and squirt, cutting and treating, you know, a lot of different methodologies. So the tools make a big difference based on methodology. So when you're setting up a project and you're picking tools, make sure you're picking your tools based on the level of methodology the level of infestation that's there. You need to understand how to determine the cost of your project, the type of labor that's suitable. Okay, are you going to take a volunteer and throw them into this? You can, but they're not going to accomplish very much. This might be better suited for a contractor or in-house labor. Understand the labor that's going to be out there, because if I'm going to take a volunteer, I'm going to go to more of a level 1 to 3, and I'm going to give them weed wrenches and hand tools. If I stick them in a level 5 like this infestation, that volunteer is going to run away and never come back. So let's make sure we pick the type of labor as well when we're picking the type of tool. You don't want to throw a volunteer into this mess of multiflora rose, privet, bush honeysuckle, and whatever else is in there. And you know, before I get into the methodologies, I'll just say seasonality is also important. And I think you might use garlic mustard as an example. You can hand pull garlic mustard some times of the year. It's no good to spray it. You can spray it other times of the year, but you just have to really know your seasons and what choice method you're choosing. So if you can keep these 7 factors in mind while we're going through the tools, I think you'll be able to put together a better program. So now let's talk about your choice of methodology. Let's talk about equipment. You know, the first thing we always have to think of is how we're going to get to the site. In our case, you know, we use Ford F-150 trucks. We have you know, they're chock full of stuff because we have travel teams. They go from North Carolina up to Maryland, over to Pennsylvania, down to, you know, maybe all the way across to Oregon in some cases, and all the way back. So we have to be pretty as efficient as we can and fuel efficient as we can, because these gas prices, although they're lower now, we know that won't be there for long, and we know that they're going to go right back up to $4 a gallon or so. So you have to be careful what you're using to get there. It's like I always say, we usually just pay the ARM and the LOL, but we try not to get it into the firstborn. Other places, this is just to give you guys some examples of what other people use down in Florida. This is called a swamp buggy. They build these things specifically for this purpose, and this thing can get you anywhere in the swamps. Obviously, get through some pretty high water in different places, so all the tools go on top, and that's what they ride around in. You guys have probably seen or worked with, or maybe you are with the Park Service. They've had over the past years some very nice trucks that have been outfitted specifically for the exotic plant management teams. You know, specifically where they can put their chemicals and things away from their clothing and other tools. So, there's a lot of really great examples of transit to the site. Make sure you got the right tools. Make sure you have the right equipment to get there. At the end of the day, I'm going to show you a lot of tools from airplanes down to hand clippers, but these two picnic tables kind of just have good examples of what most of us are going to use on a daily basis doing invasive plant management. And I'm going to show you some of the backpacks and which ones I like and which ones I don't like and all the different tools that are sitting there. So let's start with selective mechanical tools. A little bit about digging tools, hand clippers, cutting tools, etc. I'm going to talk about brands really quickly. In all the years we've been working, I'll give my guys tools. I'll let them try different brands out. We've tried every brand of chainsaw and brush cutter you can find. I know which ones work the best. The best way for me to know that is by which ones are still sitting in the barn and which ones are in the back of their trucks as they drive around doing the work. And at the end of the day, again, steel gives me nothing, but steel is the one that we usually stick with the most. They have the best way to maintain them at the different shops around towns. Anywhere across the country we can drop in and get something like this fixed. But they also last the longest when you maintain them the best. So with that said, there's a lot of different options out there. This particular option where you can interchange the blades on it is really nice for a lot of the invasive work. We'll put the hedge clipper cutter on there, and we'll work through that for a lot of the vine applications we're doing when we want to just cut vines out of trees. We'll put the chainsaw blade on there when we're actually doing something a little thicker. But it also allows you in areas where you're not allowed to foliar spray to reach down into, say, a multiflora rose, cut the stump without getting destroyed by the plant itself. You can see here up at the, I think it's George Washington National Parkway, where we use the hedge clipper to go through and cut all the porcelain berry at eye level. We call, whether we're cutting porcelain berry, bittersweet, kudzu, whatever it is, the vine that we're cutting that's draped on trees, we'll give it a haircut first, cut it at eye level, get everything on the ground, and then treat everything once it's on the ground with the foliar application. That way you're not spraying up into the trees and risking treating something that's actually desirable. You can see the after effect of that treatment. It's very clean, very easy. The trees are alive above that you want to be alive, but the vines that you're trying to kill are definitely dead. Another mechanical tools I think a lot of us use as volunteers or with our labor, whatever type of labor we use on our projects, are the leverage tools. There's a lot of them out there. I think we're all familiar with the orange one here, the weed wrench. I think we're all kind of also familiar with the fact that the weed wrench is now out of business. They had a lot of things they didn't like to do. They didn't like to sell to the government. They didn't like to sell to a lot of people. So they just decided instead of doing that, they would just go out of business. It's too bad in a lot of ways because it was one of the best leverage tools out there, but it's also opened up the market for a lot of people to jump in and try to fill that void. And the guy that actually worked for Weed Wrench is one of the builders of Weed Wrench. You can see him pictured here. It started his own business, and he got permission from Weed Wrench to basically build the same tool with several different upgrades. So it's not the same tool, but it's actually better than the Weed Wrench was. And it's white, not orange. And it's made in the USA, so that's a good, for me, that's a good point about it, keeping some jobs here. You can see it looks the same, it works the same. He's just strengthened it in some of the areas where they felt it needed to be strengthened. So let's go back really quickly. You can go to uprooter.com and check it out. He's a really nice guy. Curtis is his name. Very helpful, and we'll build these things for you and send them out to you. So you've got a good option with what used to be the Weed Wrench. We're going to call the uprooter from now on. You can see the way these tools work. It's simply a leverage tool. You put it on the bottom, in this case a bush honeysuckle, you pull it up, and you leverage it to the roots right out of the ground. There is a downside to all these tools, and I always tell people if you're going to use a weed wrench or a leverage tool or an uprooter or some device like that, make sure you've got a mattock with you, because inevitably you're going to pop the root off and some of it's going to stay in the ground, and you're going to have to dig that whole root out, or that root that's left in the ground will just grow back in a couple of years and you will not have accomplished a lot. You can see with the weed wrench and some mattocks what one group of AmeriCorps were able to accomplish in an hour or so in a park in Nashville here. There you can see where it breaks off, so yeah, always have that mattock with you. Another one's called the Root Jack. I think it's rootjack.com. It's for smaller plants, but it's much lighter. And it's really kind of easy to use and easy to carry around. So if you're looking for a lighter tool, the Root Jack's a good one. Again, though, it'll pop the roots out, so make sure you're aware of that. The Extractigator, another good person that's out there working on these tools. They're out of Canada. We worked with them before. We've got several of their tools. Extractigator works really well, and it's got a cool name. But it's a good leverage tool as well. This one is called the Honeysuckle Popper, and with this one, you have people like me that kind of go, I have no idea how people can use this tool. It's really heavy, and it's really awkward. But then I'll have people say they live and die by it. So, I'll leave that up to you. All of these tools are above $100, just depending on the make and the model, and you've got to deal with shipping as well. But most of them will last forever because of the way they're built. Now there's one out there called the Puller Bear, tree and root puller. This one's also made in Canada. So we order all these and we try all these things. I like the Puller Bear. It's a really good tool. It's a lot more expensive than some of the other ones, but it's a pretty good tool. It's got this nice lanyard on it, some simple things that they do with it makes it really nice. They engrave your name on it if you'd like. So it's kind of a cool tool. In my opinion, I'd go with the new weed wrench first, the uprooter, and then I'd probably go with this one second, but they're all really good tools to use. Other digging tools, manual tools, you have the slammer tool, which a lot of people have come up with stuff and they say it's specifically for invasives, but obviously a lot of these are old garden tools that they're retrofitting to work for invasives as well. But it's another digging tool called the slammer tool. The old TNC website always had some good examples of tools that people were using for invasives and some instructions on how to use them. I saw a presentation at the Midwest Invasive Plant Network conference in the fall about the buckthorn baggie. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but here's another chemical-free buckthorn theory. They promise this will work, and they say it's a great method. I've never used it myself, but intend to this coming season. You're basically cutting the plant, and then you're basically taking a bag and covering it up, tying it at the base, and they say that over the course of time, you won't get any more seeds germinating, and that this particular stump won't grow anymore. So it's a good option, I suppose, for non-chemical methods for control. Other simple things, a cattail knife for cutting maybe Japanese knotweed. I don't know if you've ever heard of the ringer. This is a girdling tool. It's really small. It fits in your hand. Just looks big there on the picture, but it's really a small tool about the size of your hand. It's just got that one cutting blade on the top, and you take that, and on a smoother bark tree, you can girdle the tree really easily. It's kind of like peeling a carrot, except you're peeling the bark off of this tree. And it's about a $200-something tool, that little tool, but all you ever really need to do from the point you buy it on is just replace or sharpen this blade. So it's actually pretty effective if it's the type of tool you'll use. We find that it works well on Norway maple, although I will say Norway maple doesn't necessarily just die by girdling it. Sometimes you have to girdle and treat it to actually get a kill. Other mechanical tools I think we all know about, but we don't necessarily use properly, say lopping shears. When you're going to treat vines that are on trees, whether it's euonymus or vinca or whatever the bittersweet, whatever the vine is, English ivy, first you want to cut it at the base on the very bottom, treat the stump as low to the ground as you can, and then make sure you always cut it a little higher too, and then go all the way around the tree so that you can have an area here that shows you if there's any regrowth, you're going to see it growing up through there. And everything from this point up is going to actually be dead, and you'll know that the canopy of your tree is not being strangled anymore. Hand clippers can be simply used as well for, say, a project that, in this case, in Maryland, where we had to go back because of the timing and the time of year and actually clip the seeds off of every Johnson grass head. I must have lost half my employees on that project. That wasn't a fun one, I think. I'm joking, but they really didn't like that project. So they cut them, they bagged them, a lot of work, a lot of hard work. I think a lot of that had to do with the misapplication earlier in the season. So it kind of, I think, teaches us all a lesson. Do it right the first time, and you won't have to go back and do things like this. So let's talk a little bit more about non-selective but mechanical methods. Mulching machines, They're not selective at all. You can drive around and maybe save some of your big trees, but these blades that you're looking at on the front of this gyro track will eat through any of the trees you're seeing in the picture to the right. And it'll just turn it into mulch pretty much immediately. Here's a picture when I went to see a demo. They went out behind their shop and they basically destroyed half the forest. I was like, no, don't do that. But they were proud to show me that this tool can literally chop it up just like you're seeing there. It'll also chop up that vinca or whatever's growing up the tree there, or euonymus, and whatever seed might be there, it's going to chop it up and throw it into the mulch pile as well. So it's not a selective method, but it is a way to clear an area that, you know, maybe that's just a big area that you don't need to be selective in. There's other tools that have been fitted for different applications. You can see this John Deere has this this basically cutting tool. You just kind of cut it, and you can grab onto it, yank bush honeysuckle, any of these multi-stem species out of the ground. Other tools like this have been developed that work really well for shrub removal. The Tree Terminator is a really cool name anyways. New Terminator movie coming out too, maybe it'll help them. So they basically can go through and just cut it, and then you can come back through and treat that stump if you want to for the larger applications. And then, of course, there's cultural control. We're not going to get into prescribed burning. That's certainly an option. There's water level manipulation, which is another way people control invasive species sometimes. Not necessarily mechanical anymore, but non-chemical weed control. Anything from soil solarization to harvesting. I don't know if any of you have used herbicidal soaps, but there's an option that's out there now, which is basically doesn't contain any extra herbicide ingredients, and it's kind of a low toxicity way to treat some weeds. But you have to always remember, and down in that text somewhere it says this, it's a good thing for annual weeds, but it won't go into the root system, so you're basically just killing a top layer. So you have to, again, think about your application before you actually pick your methodology. There's thermal vegetation. A lot of the organic gardening movement has brought a lot of new techniques out there that we may never have used, thought were out there, or they brought them to this country from places we didn't realize used them. Thermal or steam treatments is one. The hot water weed control, I don't think Waipuna's in business anymore, I'm not sure, but there are other options out there. It takes a long time that the hot water comes out of this into this hose, and you basically have to walk very slowly down the path. In Carrboro, North Carolina, they made a regulation where you couldn't use chemical on any of the public walkways or anything, so they'll use this along sidewalks and along right-of-ways, and they'll kill their weeds with the hot water treatment there. It'll kill anything pretty much. You're talking about a lot of hot water, and it's really hot, so it's a little dangerous, but it seems to work for them. You have steam weed control, like I was saying, good way to treat a non-chemical way. You've got the kind of fire options that are out there. Got the torch backpack kits. I've never been comfortable putting a backpack of gas on my back and blowing fire out of a hose. So a lot of people are, and good for you, and it works in some cases, but I also know that it uses a lot of gas and a lot of propane when you're doing this type of work. So while you're not using chemicals, you are using another tool that you may not want to be spending all that money on. So English ivy is a good example of a plant that a lot of us have that it really takes a lot of chemical to treat sometimes, or you might be using the exact chemical that you need to use with the exact percentage, but for some reason it just doesn't work. Maybe the waxy cuticle doesn't let it penetrate as well. It might be something. So a lot of people have come up with some kind of protocols for doing hand pulling of English ivy. And Eric Wold and Jesse Carey Hobbs out of the city of Eugene did a presentation for us at a Invasive Plant Council workshop a couple of years ago. And they showed us how they do it, and they do a really good job. I think they call it extractive restoration. They basically hand pull all this ivy. You can see the left side of that top left picture, and you can see the right side of the before and the after by just hand pulling, maybe rolling it up into a carpet and rolling it out of there. There's going to be some projects we're working on this year that are going to require the same type of methods. Subtractive restoration is what they call it, and you can see the difference just by taking out this English ivy and not doing anything else. You can see the picture to the right. all the native plants that grew in where the ivy was kind of holding them back. So we can use chainsaws, backpack sprayers, all kinds of tools, but at the end of the day, our hands will work fine if you've got enough people to do the job. Kind of to give you some estimated costs that they were going with, they decided that hand pulling costs around $3,000 to $7,000 per acre with some follow-up costs, where the initial ivy spraying might be $500 an acre. So the cost is significantly different, but if you don't like using herbicide, it's certainly an option. Hand pulling for Japanese stiltgrass is good for volunteers in an area where there's not a lot of it. You can see purple loosestrife pulls in different parts of the country. I believe this was up in, well, I think it was in the Adirondacks one year where we were working. Another area maybe in New Hampshire here, I think. Now this one's in Massachusetts on there. This is where they were pulling garlic mustard where we didn't want to be using chemicals. It's a good plant to pull. It's shallow root system, easy to get out of there. There's purple loosestrife pulls up in Alaska where they did some EDRR and got a lot of their loosestrife out before it became a really big problem. So then there's organic weed management, mulching, allelopathy, plastic films. You can see how well the plastic films work sometimes. The Japanese knotweed found a way through, but their options are out there. Any types of mulch, whether it's gravel, hardwood mulch, laying down different types of barriers. You certainly can use chaining in some of the fields out in the west and the prairies. Flooding is often used. Another non-chemical method is goats. I think a lot of us have used goats or seen goats in use in the past. There's contractors out there. Goats, what's this one called? GoatsEatWeeds.com. Lanny Momberg was running this a couple of years ago, but they would go across the west with their goats throughout the different seasons, and these goats will eat just about anything and really knock it down. We've seen the goats used in a lot of applications where we're working, where they use it a lot more for education, so people always ask what the goats are doing. So on part of the area, they'll be using goats. On the other part, they might be using a contractor. So let's jump into herbicide control really quickly. Always make sure you're using the most effective herbicide for the species you're treating. Follow the methods on the label. Choose the optimal time to apply the chemicals. And the label is the law, okay? I'm not going to give a lot of prescriptions and things like that today. If you guys want to know what we do to treat something, give me a call, shoot me an email, we can talk about it. But always remember, the label's the law, okay? Read the label. It usually tells you exactly what you need to know and what you can and can't do. Make sure you have the right adjuvants. Oftentimes chemicals need something to help them. A sticker maybe, you know, there's a sticker spreader called New Film that we use that's basically made from pine sap. So you put it in with your chemical that doesn't have a surfactant already, and it'll actually help the herbicide stick to the plant better. It'll actually get it rain fast a lot quicker, so it won't run off. Always use marking dyes. Make sure you've got something that marks where you're spraying so that you not only see that you're spraying the right thing and not hitting non-target plants, but you also see if there's chemical on you if you need to go clean up, because the blue dye will definitely mark where that chemical is. And always make sure you're mixing in a safe place. Make sure you mix in a bucket and then add that to the sprayer. Use clean water in the mixture and mix it thoroughly. And this is my pet peeve. I always have to say it. Only mix what you're going to spray the day that you're spraying. Don't mix something and then stick it in the back of the truck overnight, because inevitably when you go back the next day, it's going to be raining and you're not going to be able to use it. And then the next day, somebody else will be using that sprayer, and maybe it wasn't marked and you have no idea what's in there, and then you've suddenly got this backpack full of solution. You don't even know what it is. Clean your equipment. The equipment will last longer. If you have extra spray, spray it out on the site, on the target plant, before you leave the site that same day. Make sure you leave the end of the day with empty tanks, and you'll be a lot happier for it. So let's talk about some of the low-volume herbicide application tools. Backpack sprayers is one of the first ones we'll talk about. So you can line them up, and everybody's got their different tools that are out there. At the end of the day, the Birchmeier has the best warranty, but it's one of the most expensive, and it's got some quirks we really don't like about it. The Field King, the Solos that you can buy at Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot, They don't usually hold up to using water or oil-based herbicides or chemicals. But the Jacto and the Shindawa have always worked really well for us. The Shindawa has gone a little cheaper on us. I think they were both made in the same factory for a long time. But now Shindawa has taken a lot of its metal parts and they turn them into plastic, and it just breaks down a lot faster. So we've been going more with Jacto over the last couple of years. But Shindawas, if you can still get them in the right make and model, the professional model, the 518 I think it was, you can see on the back there that's some pretty good components and everything's self-contained. So you want to choose the proper model. You also want to choose the appropriate nozzle. I tell people when you get your backpack sprayer, take off the nozzle that comes with the backpack sprayer because it's usually a cheap piece of plastic that you really can't calibrate very well, and just put on a better one, maybe a VisiFlow nozzle that you purchased ahead of time. VisiFlow is basically, stainless steel is the best, but it's the most expensive. VisiFlow has part plastic, part stainless steel, so it's less expensive, but you get the same quality out of it. Make sure you're using the right nozzle for the application you're using. If you need a fan, make sure coming out of that backpack sprayer you've got a fan tip on the spray gun or the spray wand. If you need something more direct, make sure you've got the right nozzle on there. Look at that picture. Does this look like the situation you'd want to be in, spraying straight over your head? The answer is no. You want to think of another option. If you're working in frag and it looks like this, you don't want to stand in there and just spray all around it. Maybe you need to cut a path through there so you're not brushing up against all the plant that's been sprayed already. Maybe you need to find an extension wand that can actually reach up over the top of something like this and go around the perimeter of it. But you don't want to be walking through your path with your backpack sprayer where you're spraying. You either want to spray backwards and go out of it, or find some other method or tool that can reach up over the top. A lot of these things you can build by yourself just by buying a few extra parts. So backpack sprayers, again, we like Jacto or Shindawa. Jacto is the one we've been using the most lately. And it's got comfortable pads, it's got comfortable straps. It locks into place when you put it in the truck really conveniently. So there's a lot of good things about it that I would recommend. Good for spraying multiflora rows and being very targeted. Use the wand when you want to get down to the ground and spray something. You can see how specific you can get if the applicator is paying attention to what they're doing, whether it's English ivy or any other plant. Here's some backpack spraying we did in the Virgin Islands at a national park there. You can see the before and after. The left side is 7 days after treatment. The right side was treated 7 days previous to that. So, you know, with a backpack, you can actually accomplish a lot. There's 2 weeks after treatment going down the hill here. You can also use backpacks for basal sprays. A lot of trees need basal applications. So you'll basically not have to cut the tree at all. You just take your wand and spray around the base of the tree. The herbicide actually goes into the bark and into the tree. So it's not for a thick bark tree, but it's a good one for you know, Ailanthus or Paulownia or trees like that. And you can see with the blue dye how that looks. And effectively, the tree will stay alive while the herbicide's working. So it'll actually take that herbicide up and down throughout the tree system. And the advantage of this over treating something like Ailanthus is once you cut Ailanthus, you're effectively just treating the top part of Ailanthus, even if you're cutting and treating that stump. It won't get down into the entire root system. And then 2 or 3 years later, when you cut and treat an Ailanthus, it'll look like you got a good kill, but 2 or 3 years later, all around the perimeter of that stump, the stump will be gone, but you'll have root sprouts coming up off the roots. So basal bark treatment helps alleviate that by getting into the tree and working with the tree while it's alive, taking the herbicide further into the root system. It's also good if you just, in the case like this in Ohio where they planted thousands of new trees in the middle of all this autumn olive, more than I've ever seen, larger than I've ever seen. So it was actually a good opportunity. If we used foliar sprayed in here, we probably would have killed several of the other trees. Whereas if we were able to cut and treat, or in this case, basal bark, so you're not dropping this live tree on all these trees, the new trees, we were able to basal bark this autumn olive and kill it. So it's another application for that. A friend of mine from Hawaii, James Leary, Dr. Leary, comes up with all kinds of neat tools and equipment. Here's his hands-free backpack sprayer. He was testing to go up in the hills in Hawaii where you have to push the vegetation aside with your hands. So by being hands-free, you can work through the forest, keeping your hands on things while you're backpack spraying. Not too selective, but you know, he comes up with some neat stuff on that. Finvert, if you've never seen this, it's a whole new system. It's a whole system in itself that you actually are able to reduce drift. You can see from that spray that there's not a lot of drift that's going to come off of that. And I've seen this demoed several times in, you know, 10 to 20 mile an hour wind, and the spray almost doesn't drift at all with the tool that's put together. So that's called Finvert. You might look that up sometime. You know, from backpack sprays, you can go down to hand sprayers. If we're meeting in person, I would take every hand sprayer, tell you about it, and throw it in a dumpster. Because just about every one of them is junk. They break. They're not made for daily use, I don't think. The best one we've been able to find over the years is the Hudson Handy Tech Sprayer, the one with the black top, the taller one here. Just make sure it's the Handy Tech Sprayer that has the right kind of seals on it. Now, if we get a box of 10, 3 of them aren't going to work, and we'll send them back, but they will return 3 new ones to us. So there is a bit of a warranty on them. And they'll last for a while, maybe a week if you work with them well. But you need these guys because you're using them in your cutting and treating applications. I won't tell you the story about the RL Flowmaster other than they talked me into buying, you know, a sample size of 100, and they went off to do the order, came back and said they pulled it from the shelves because they were always breaking. So hand sprayers are tough. They used to be great when they had these blue tops. It's kind of a thing I've noticed with chainsaws, hand sprayers, any type of tool, backpacks. When something is one color and the next year it's another color, it's like they just change the quality of it with the color change. And the blue hand sprayers from Hudson used to be great. They never broke. But the blacktop ones now break all the time, and they don't have the blue ones anymore. So you can see what happens out of the box. They'll just drip and leak. The seals aren't tight. So just pay attention when you're using them. And then you've got the different spray masters that are good for other applications. So you use these hand sprayers when you're doing a girdle and treat. So let's say you're in here with your chainsaw, you girdle it, you just pull the hand sprayer out of your pocket and treat that stump. In this case, it's cutting and treating with chainsaws. That's a more expensive option, but it takes care of the job. Here you can see cutting a privet at the base, treating the cambium layer immediately. We don't wait. We treat it, we cut it, and we treat it immediately. We don't give it time to scar over. So I encourage the same thing from you, and then you'll get this kind of a kill versus a lot of sprouts that come up. Once again, we've tried a lot of different tools. With chainsaws, we always go back to the steel. Right now we use the MS-201T. It's the tree climbing saw. It's a really expensive saw, but it'll last a long, long time. It works really well, and it's the lightest weight. You can put a small bar on there, and you can get through most of the invasives that you need to get through. Someday I'll let you look through this list if you'd like. You know, I have my guys always critique the tools that they use, so they gave me the good and the bad of the 201T, which is the new version of the MS-200, which everybody likes, but they still like this. It's just got some quirks to it. There's always battery-operated saws, too. They don't last very long. The charge doesn't last long, but you can get some work done with them. This is just a fun cut-and-treat picture from Shenandoah National Park. That's an ailanthus tree. That's big. So cut it as low to the ground as you can. Get all the debris off the stump. If you cut it high like this, this is the fatal error. Don't cut it high, treat it, and walk away, because you want that stump as close to the ground as possible, or you're not going to get a good kill. If you cut it as low to the ground as possible, treat it within 30 seconds of the cut, you're going to get about a 99% mortality rate on that stump. If not, you're going to get these resprouts. So always just take it down another level. You know, you don't have to kill your chain on the rocks, but take it down low enough to where you can treat that stump properly. Cutting and treating is good. Here's a hillside in Pittsburgh. We had to do a lot of cutting and treating of bush honeysuckles and buckthorn. With that small saw, it allows us to get in there and work in a little safer manner. Also works in understory like this, Chico Botanical Gardens, where we cut out all the bush honeysuckle, and you can see how selective in the after picture we're able to be with cutting and treating. You can do the same with brush cutters. Again, we'll use a steel brush cutter, put a good blade on there. We use the handlebars, take off that. We put on the circular saw blade because the chisel tooth, because the scratcher tooth you can't sharpen, but the chisel tooth you can. It'll last longer. Costs a little more, but lasts a lot longer. And then we'll go into areas where we're not allowed to foliar spray or where it's just better to cut and treat. And we'll cut all the smaller things with the brush cutter. You can see Lee there before and after using a brush cutter for maybe 30 minutes with Chinese privet. So cut it at the base just like you do the chainsaw. Treat that stump immediately, and then move on to the next one. It works really well. In our case, we might carry 2 different bottles of hand bottle sprayers with 2 different herbicides because, say, in Florida, there might be 2 or 3 different plants that require different herbicides. So instead of going through there 2 or 3 times, we'll just have 3 bottles with different colored dye in them. Hacking and squirting is another really good option. You can use a hatchet. We've learned that some of the best things to use are machetes when you're doing hack and squirt, but it's essentially cutting around the tree, making incisions there, letting the tree live while the herbicide works. So you're just putting the herbicide right into the incision. In most cases, you don't have to make a complete cut around when you're doing this, but you're trying to get into that cambium layer. This Hudson Power Sprayer is pretty good for this application because you're using less chemical. Our guys did their critique on machetes, and they found the cold steel bolo is the best one. It's interesting when you start doing research on things like machetes to find the best one, because it's not usually the people that are using them for cutting and treating plants that give the recommendations. It's the people that are using them for the wrong things that are giving the recommendations, so you have to be kind of careful what you're looking at. But at the end of the day, that cold steel bolo, that's the brand, was the best kind. And you can see they like it because you can hack the tree, and then you can use the blade to hold open the incision and just lay the herbicide right in there. And it's a lighter tool to use. So other selective herbicide application equipment. Anybody seen the herbicide ballistic technology? If you like to play paintball, this is the same theory. The same guy from Hawaii, Dr. Leary, took a paint gun. He had people manufacture paintballs that have herbicide in them so that they can go into really hard-to-reach places where people might not get. And they'll have sharpshooters and helicopters shooting these paintballs down on the target vegetation they're trying to treat. And yes, I've seen it work and seen it in action, and it's interesting. It's really interesting. It's something I think you should look up online. I've got his presentation on our website if you want to see what it's all about. His name's James Leary again, and again, you should be able to see, I'm guessing, a version of this presentation to get all the information you want. Hypo hatchet tree injector is another tool that's out there. I don't recommend it. It's relatively expensive, but at the end you have this little cheap plastic tube that comes out of your herbicide that you're carrying on your side. I think we all know working with invasives, it can be pretty difficult to walk through a lot of the invasive patches we're working, so that tube gets pulled out and herbicide can splatter everywhere. You almost have to suck on the tube to get the herbicide out, which I don't recommend doing. But the force of your swing should bring the herbicide into the tube, up through the hatchet handle, and then out through the cutting area. So when you cut it, the herbicide just comes out. It's kind of like a wet blade, just a handheld wet blade. You can see the hole where the chemical comes out. It's an expensive tool. It's been out for a long time. I think more so because it's a novel thing than it is because it works really well. There's the eject injector gun where they have bullets that are full of chemical, 22 shells, and you go around a tree and you can see how you inject the 22 shells all around the tree. This is not a 100% effective tool. Some people really like it. You can see the chemical content in the bullets there. Just lay it down in the sheath, then you go around the base of the tree and inject it into the areas around the tree. You know, you can hack and squirt the tree too and get just the same effect, but I guess it's a selective way to get the chemical in there. It just doesn't always work, and you use a lot more of those shells than you really want to. Another tool that a lot of people are using now are knotweed injection. They'll do it for knotweed or sometimes Phragmites. So there's special injector guns that are created for this. We had to use it on a few of our projects as mandated by the contracts. So chemical goes in here, comes out that little point. People are using it a lot for knotweed just to stick it in there, and they kind of fill up the base here. The downside of using injector guns, well, first of all, is this: the number of stems you have to treat. That's a big downside. And in some cases, they're asking you to fill up those cut areas. So you can see all the stems and all the cut stumps. It's a lot of work. You wouldn't want to use it in a case like this or a case like this. Oftentimes, it's just easier to foliar spray the Japanese knotweed. You're using less chemical. I think it's kind of deceitful because, in a lot of ways, deceptive, because when you're foliar spraying knotweed, you're using about a 2% ratio, 2% chemical solution to 98% water. And you're using selective chemicals, so you're not killing everything around it. When you're using the injector gun, just look at these statistics from BASF that I found. In one of the same area, you can see gallons of herbicide per acre. You inject about 18 gallons of rodeo, where if you're spraying the habitat foliar spray, you're using 0.2 gallons of herbicide to treat the same area. Now, you're going over the label rate for sure for glyphosate in that scenario, and I think most of the times in this method you probably are, so you have to be really careful how you do this. I don't know what just happened there. Give me 1 second. And I won't get into this, but the cost is significant as well. For rodeo, for this comparison, it's about $10,400. For habitat, it's about $200. So really think about what you're using. People try to take tools like this and use a wet blade on them. So you have a bush hog that has a wet blade at the end of it, and it cuts the stump and it treats the stump. We've done some different methods, some different trials with this, and there's effective times to use it, and there's a lot of ineffective times to do it this way. But you're getting chemical on the stumps you treat as it powers over them. Diamond Mowers is one of the brands that does that. There's a super sponge weed wiper, the herbicide wand, clip clean shears, cut and kill hand pruners, same theory. Herbicide goes in right when you cut it. And then really quickly, because I'm pretty much out of time here, I have 2 minutes left on my clock. Now I'm just going to show you some high-volume herbicide application equipment. ATVs, you can get a lot of really good equipment now with these boomless nozzles, so you don't have to have the big booms behind them. You can get tanks that carry about 40 gallons in each side, so you can really carry a lot of volume and do some selective methods. We always get about a 10-foot hose on the back of our ATVs or our RTVs so that we can step off and do more selective treatments. You can get some spray covers for that. You can see the boomless nozzle, how that works, so you can get through some tight areas. There's always the old-fashioned sprayers that you can pull behind maybe an RTV to do multiflora rose treatments. You do them the right season, like we were talking earlier in the spring. You'll kill the multiflora rose, but everything else will live. You might use something like this in Johnson grass. One of the newer sets of Kubotas that we have now, we have these remote control hoses that we work with. So instead of having one person run the hose, one person do the spraying, we'll have dual reels on this. So we'll have two people running a hose at the same time, and they just use a remote control to reel the hose in. So they can go 300 feet away from this vehicle down into a kudzu patch and back. And we're basically able to cut our time and our cost in half now. Land tamer is another tool that's out there people are using for invasives. The thing you have to watch about with these tools, make sure on a tool like this that's amphibious, you don't do all this spraying, drive through the field, and then go drive through a lake. Because there's herbicide on those tracks. Be careful what you do and how you do it. ATVs, RTVs are good for Japanese stilt grass when it gets this bad, like it did in Gettysburg or Valley Forge. I had a guy, one of my trainings say, Steve, those aren't sprayers, all those RTVs. I said, well, you'll just have to show me what a sprayer is. So he sent me an email. He said, this is a sprayer. I was like, okay, I get your point. You're not going to get in many tight situations, but that's definitely more of a sprayer. Most of us don't use a boom like that on what we're doing, but I guess these guys can cover a lot of ground. I think this was in South Dakota with something like that. Here's one that's actually relatively selective. There goes my timer, so I'm going to be done here in a second. But you can see this. This guy can spray 2,880,000 acres in 46 hours. And they're selective. They do it the right time of day. Obviously, it's not going to work on a 1-acre patch of garlic mustard, but it's out there, and this is what some of the military installations are using for some of their treatments. Obviously, helicopter spraying as well. You see a lot of this used in Fish and Wildlife Service and in other places. Remarkably efficient and effective and selective with GPS technology and how they can read the wind and everything now. I think the last one I'll show you really quickly is called Timber Mark with air induction. So these are what they use to mark timber lines with, where they're going to be doing some logging. But they've adapted this, I think it was Timberland did, to where it's actually a sprayer. So they can take a helicopter, drop this down, spray a specific area, and move on to the next. And then you've got less selective methods as well, but it might work on something like this autumn olive. So quickly, to close out the talk before I take questions, I'm cutting and treating. If you hadn't heard this story before, if you have, I'm sorry, but cutting and treating bush honeysuckle in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Right in the stems, you know, it's a multi-stem plant, right in the center of all that. Halfway through my cut, I kind of stopped because I thought I saw a rock. Well, it was a hand grenade. Now, I thought it was a toy, so I picked it up and I moved it aside and I finished cutting, went down the row, finished cutting, and then I called the site manager just in case. I said, you know, I better just check. I think I just found a hand grenade. I think it's a toy, but I moved it aside. Well, they called the bomb squad. They detonated the bomb, so it was a live hand grenade. One of these pineapple shaped from the wars, I guess, when military guys, the guy was explaining to me, when military guys come back from the war in the past, they bring souvenirs, including stuff like this. When these guys pass away, their family doesn't know what to do with it, so they'll literally walk out into the forest. They think they're going to get in trouble if they turn it in, so they walk out in the forest and they'll just dump these things in the forest. So in Pittsburgh city parks, I found this thing in the tree. Another half an inch I would have cut into it and detonated it. Fortunately for me, I didn't, but that's a true story. This part's not as true, but I figured we would start our own. We got cutting and treating, we got foliar spraying, we'll have blow up and treat. So we've got our tanks in Virginia with the kudzu that actually beat the tank. We didn't get to the kudzu fast enough there. You've got the mimosa being targeted down in some of the battlefields in the south with one of their cannons. Seriously though, be careful where you're working. There's threats of thorns and hornets and snakes, and there really are threats of things like hand grenades too. You got to be careful. So that concludes my 2-hour presentation. Are there any questions about the content, or was there any content?
Yes, we have lots of questions.
Okay.
And I'm going to kind of go backwards through the questions here. What chemical do you use to treat privet stumps after cutting?
Well, depending on where you are and the temperature, there's a lot of factors there. I'd say email me some more specifics, and I'll give you a more specific answer. But if it's above 65 degrees, we would use glyphosate. Mm-hmm. If it's below 65 degrees, we would use a triclopyr.
Okay. And here's a question related to all those airplanes you showed. Any feedback on drone use?
You know, I haven't seen that yet, but that's a really good question, though. I'll guarantee you that'll be out within a 6-month period, probably, some type of drone use or chemical spraying.
Right. You mentioned Phragmites, but in a large stand like the one you showed, what would you recommend for treatment?
Well, lots of people will burn it, and once it's burned, it'll get a decent, knockback, and then they'll go back in and foliar spray the next year when it's not as dense. But for the most part, there's several chemicals, and I'm not going to recommend one without more details on the site, but lots of people will just have to foliar spray something like that. And there's different tools that kind of raise you over the top of the Phragmites to do it. A lot of people will just use the helicopter applications for really large stands. Now, we worked in Michigan before, and we've had to hike in with a backpack sprayer, 2 miles, spray it out, hike back out, fill it up again, hike back in. They wouldn't allow us to use RTVs, ATVs, or anything. So it really depends on the scenario.
Okay. What's your mix for basil bark backpack spraying for, say, buckthorn in the Northeast and Norway maple?
Okay, again, I'll say timing and season really makes a difference. But when it's warm enough, you can get away with about a 25% solution to 75% basil oil. In the colder temperatures, we usually bump that up as much as 50%. When I got to really clarify when we're talking chemicals, we're not talking about using 75% glyphosate in the mix. We're talking about if I have 1 gallon and I say use 25% of the solution, it's 25% of what comes in that bottle of Roundup. So in the bottle of Roundup, you need to make sure when we're talking about this, we're talking about the Roundup bottle that comes with 46% or higher active ingredient. So it's 46% active ingredient, it's going to be about 54% inert ingredients. That's 25%. The 75% will be water. Does that make sense? Or basil oil, depending on what you're treating. So make sure when you talk chemicals, you know what percentages you're talking about.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. And then there were a couple questions. One person was concerned about the use of glyphosate given new independent research, and she wondered if you had any comments on that, and also whether there have been any other concoctions for treatment other than herbicides that have been tried.
Yeah, I'll say this. Never trust an herbicide based on just the research that you read about. Always do more and more research for it. Just stay on top of it. And when you're doing your treatments, if you're using a specific herbicide like glyphosate, there's been a lot of studies that show it works really well, and there's been several studies over the last couple of years that people are questioning the use of it. You just have to be really careful about how you apply it and where you apply it. For instance, one of the big questions over the last couple of years was about using herbicide in an aquatic situation using Roundup, and how it'll kill frogs or amphibious, creatures. Well, the problem with that whole research was that you're not supposed to use Roundup Pro like they were suggesting in the article in that situation. So whoever did that was doing it illegally. They didn't read the label. It wasn't labeled for that purpose. So you really have to understand where you're spraying it and how you're spraying it. And at the end of the day, it's really important to use the least amount of herbicide possible. So if there's a mechanical or other type of method that works along with the chemical so you can reduce the use of it, that's the best way to do it. That's what IPM is all about.
Yeah. And just a follow-up question about the basal bark treatment. For cold weather, are you saying that you prefer triclopyr over glyphosate in your mix?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so some other questions not related to herbicides. What mechanical method or tools would you use for removal of yellow flag iris that's smothering a pond?
I'd love to know where that yellow flag iris is, if someone could kind of respond to that really quickly. We're working with yellow flag iris in the Northwest right now. So if this person's in the Northeast, I'd love to hear where and what they're about. So I might suggest on that, instead of me giving that answer, I'm not sure of the specific answer, yeah. Give me a call. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, so she's on Long Island.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, so why don't you give me a call? We'll talk about that one because there's some new research on that.
Okay. How about black swallowwort removal, and what methods have you used for that?
Well, use everything from glyphosate to triclopyr to hand pulling.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the lower the percentage we can use, the better. To give you an example, if you're fully or spraying swallowwort and you're using Roundup Pro and it's 90 degrees outside, well, first of all, if you're spraying in an understory, make sure if you're going to spray triclopyr that the temperature is under 90 degrees because it's volatile and it'll get up into your canopy. So once you get above a certain degree, you really want to stick with something like glyphosate if you're comfortable using it. And if you are comfortable using it, you want to use the lowest percentage you possibly can to treat that plant. A lot of people will bump the percentage, so where it says it's only, the best thing might be a 2% solution to that 98% water. A lot of people might say, well, it'll do better if I put 10% in there. But what you're effectively doing is top killing that plant because the herbicide just kills it too fast. Whereas if you use the 2%, the herbicide gets into the plant, it is able to work while the plant's alive, get it down to the root system better, and kill the plant. So there's a fine line there you have to be really careful of. But yeah, any of those three methods will work.
Okay. And another person asks, what's the best time of year to pull Japanese knotweed, and do they have allelopathic roots?
I've heard that they do have allelopathic tendencies. I don't have the proof of that. And as far as hand pulling knotweed, pick your season, basically. I would say the fall would probably be a good time to do it just because it's cooler out and a little easier to pull. Obviously, the winter's not good. If you're pulling it, you really can do it whenever the thing is growing because you're getting a longer stem. It's easier to grasp it and get it out of the ground.
Yeah, I think as long as the ground's not frozen, it doesn't make a difference.
Exactly.
And then do you have a recommendation on how many inches of mulch you need to deter germination and growth of mile-a-minute?
There's a lot of recommendations out there. All of them come with the caveat that it didn't really work as well. But I have one presentation I'll be happy to share with whoever that question came with. If you'll email me that, I'll send you the presentation because this person knows a lot more about the mulching techniques than I do.
Okay.
And I think you'll get some great details out of this guy. So.
Okay. Yeah, that was okay. From the beginning of your talk, you talked about cleaning equipment. Do you have any publications that you could share a citation about for this person does residential properties, but she'd like to share a publication on cleaning equipment with future contractors?
Yeah, I can find a couple copies of some of the publications. Again, email me that request and I'll ship one out to you.
Okay.
Whoever wants that, I can probably find it for whoever's in the audience. Just let me know.
Yeah, so that was Carla Porter, and she's going to email you about that and the MILA. If you could send me the publications about cleaning, that would be great too, and I can try to figure out a way to share them with the audience.
Yeah, no problem.
And let's see. If given a choice for larger Norway maples, would you pick basal bark or hack and squirt for greatest effectiveness as the primary consideration versus labor cost?
Probably hack and squirt. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of reasons. It works just about as equally effective as basal bark, but you're going to be using a lot less herbicide, and you're still dealing with the volatility if it's warm outside, too warm, but I think the hack and squirt just works better. It's easier to do. Just have a sharp blade and work your way around each tree. Make sure you get the right number of cuts, and there's a certain height you need to go up the tree. You don't want to be too high up the tree when you're doing this cut. Just do it at a comfortable level about waist high, and then go around and just, every few inches do a hack and a squirt, and you'll be able to get most of it there. Now remember, when you're dealing with the smaller stems, the hack and squirt doesn't work. You might as well just either foliar spray it or just cut it at the base and go ahead and treat the stump.
Yeah. And then the last question we've got here is best techniques for removing Japanese honeysuckle. And I know that's kind of there's a lot of techniques you could use, but if you wanted to do a quick summary.
Depends on what you're trying to do, I guess. I'll tell you, here in Nashville, that's one of our biggest enemies. And we base a lot of those techniques, again, on the labor types. So if you're working with volunteers, your best method is to have someone basically have as many mattocks and leverage tools as possible and go through there. Bush honeysuckle pulls up really easily. Maybe not when the ground's frozen, but in any other time of the year. It's best to do it in the spring or the fall because the leaves are already out on the bush honeysuckle most of the time when the leaves are not out on other things, so it's really visible and the volunteers can see it really easily. So you can hand pull it, you can use the leverage tools to pull it out. What I usually do is suggest that everybody goes through and does the pulling, and then we follow up with the cutting and treating with this person that's certified. So they'll cut the stump and just get that herbicide right on the cambium layer of the stump, so they'll get the bigger ones, and it's a lot more efficient that way. Just don't let the volunteers go in there with the intent of taking out the biggest honeysuckle in there, or they'll spend the whole day on one of them.
Yeah. Would you
it really depends what you're doing, I guess.
Yeah. Would you recommend pretty much the same approach for bittersweet?
Well, bittersweet really is one of those vines that are not, you almost wish it was thicker sometimes.
Yeah.
It's so sparse sometimes that you have to really search and find your way. And the best way with bittersweet is to follow the vine back until it's in the ground. And right before it hits the ground, cut it there and treat that stump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be a lot thicker than honeysuckle sometimes. Mm-hmm. All right, well, I think that's the end of our questions, and we're pretty much out of time, but I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar. So, Steve, I want to thank you again, and Steve has a lot of these presentations on his website as well, invasiveplantcontrol.com. So thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.